Hello everyone, this is your host Professor Reha, here with the class examination of the Sorcerer, which is specifically the combination of the Demolitionist and Arcanist. Now, there are going to be a certain amount of people who are going to say, well, there's really one only truly great way of going about building this. Not quite true. A lot of people are going to look at the Demolitionist, obviously large quantities of fire damage, and they're going to take one look at the Arcanist and they're going to say, reckless power. Fire and Aether. Easy sauce. It's insanely obvious. Yes, this is a fantastic build. You can absolutely go reckless power, Kalidor's Tempest. My recommendation would be to grab the Wrath of Agrivix, throw Inferno in there, grab a delicious Albrecht's Aether Ray, bring that all the way to Disintegration, grab Devastation if you want. You know, you've got all kinds of options, depending on whether or not you're a ranged or a melee character, which makes a difference in which one of these you generally want. But Reckless Power is an excellent choice here, don't get me wrong. But that's not the whole story. You see, you have a couple of other options that you can really utilize to make fairly interesting, fun, and exciting builds, beyond the obvious. For example, you could go with large quantities of lightning damage, go Granado with Skyfire, or potentially Concussive Bomb on Canister. You can go Stunjacks, and you can go with this delightful lightning-focused build, and then throw in Star Pact. And at that point, your horizons are even more opened. Furthermore, just because you're going with Reckless Power, as I've stated in other videos, don't be afraid of grabbing Alexa's Flash Freeze in there and throwing that out there, just for the fire resistance. Even if your cold damage is non-existent, that does not matter. But the fire resistance decrease, that is a doubling of your, that is a 100% reduction of fire resistance. This is big. This is really big news. A lot. You could actually go with a 100% fire build. Fire damage, 100%. Obviously, you wouldn't because of the demolition. Just because of how the Demolitionist intrinsically works. But you could go 100% fire. And unless the enemy is completely immune to freezing and fire, Alexa's Flash Freeze will get the job done for that fire resistance reduction. Obviously, there are going to be bosses, a lot of bosses, and some heroes that aren't going to care about Alexa's Flash Freeze. Have a backup plan. Like I've always said, plan B. But for pretty much almost all regular enemies, this will bring down their fire resistance to the point where you can basically ignore it. Furthermore, if you are going with the lightning damage, you can grab Trozan's Sky Shard, mix in some cold damage in there. Whether or not you're going with Star Pact, you can absolutely throw in Trozan's Sky Shard, go for Frozen Core, maybe even go with the Shattered Star if you're feeling particularly spicy. Or, if you are, again, feeling rather spicy, you could go Reckless Power, go into, not Mental Alacrity, go into Fabric of Reality and do some chaos damage by utilizing Demon Fire and Agonizing Flames, or Brimstone, or even Thermite Mine and Hellfire. This is actually one of the best builds that you can actually do a really spicy Hellfire Mine combo, because you're already reducing their Aether and Chaos resistance, so do some more Chaos damage. Go for that Agonizing Flame. Go for Wrath of Agrivix Reckless Power. Boost it all up with Fabric of Reality. You can absolutely dominate with this, and the benefit here, which I've mentioned before, is that the contrast of the Aether and the Chaos damage means that you're going to be able to do pretty impressive amounts of damage to most enemies that come your way. Now, granted, because the inherent nature of Demolition is your Chaos damage is going to be a little weak. It's not like the Occultist Arcanist combination that's really going to be able to bust out some serious Chaos damage. It's not going to work that way. Not quite as well. But it is fairly impressive, and especially since you can add in the fire damage for anything that happens to be resistant to both Chaos and Aether, which is almost nothing as far as I can remember. Throw in some fire damage as well, for some freebies. If you wanted to, you could absolutely go into Flame Touched and boost some fire and lightning damage that way as well. You have that option. There's a lot of different ways you can build this and do really substantial amounts of damage, but keep in mind, you're basically picking a skill to focus around, and then the rest of your build is basically going to be revolving around that. The Hellfire Mine is a great example. I want to play a Hellfire Mine focused build. Sorcerer. A Hellfire Sorcerer. Okay, sure. That's great. You can absolutely do that. You can go Reckless Power. You can go... Actually, that probably wouldn't be a smart move. You can go Devastation. Go Agonizing Flames. Absolutely. You can absolutely do that. That'll work great. But pretty much all of your skill decisions are going to focus around whether or not they do the Aether and Chaos and Fire damage that you need them to do. Or if you want to go with just a absolutely pure, unadulterated Reckless Power, go into that Inferno, the Kalidor's Tempest, you're going to go into Flame Touched, maybe use Splash and Granado with the lightning damage conversion, so you can do all of your, your physical damage doesn't exist, it's all lightning and fire. You can do that. You want to go with Vindictive Flame with Reckless Power? Absolutely, you can do that too. Flame Touched increases that? Absolutely fantastic. That's a great time. You can go with the Mortar Trap, go into the big one, and now you're doing lightning, physical, and fire damage. And that physical damage, of course, with Reckless Power is being converted into more Aether damage. So that's a pretty fun time as well. You've just got so many different options. Oh, you wanna go Star Pack Demolitionist, and people laugh at you. Joke's on them. Slap out a Kalidor's Tempest real quick, go into Flame Touched, and just have yourself a magical time. Go with the Stun Jacks if you want to. Leave your friends behind, because your friends don't Stun Jack. And go into the Lightning Granado. Go into the Lightning Canister Bomb. Increase your lightning further with Flame Touched. Give you a little bit of fire damage to bring that back in. Absolutely, that works great. Or if you want to go with, if you're feeling particularly bold and spicy, don't even start backed. Go into Absolute Zero, get that physical resistance, that fire resistance in there. Well, you probably still would want to go into Star Pact anyways, but get that physical resistance in there. And you want to go with an interesting little cold lightning physical combo? Get Temper in there. Leave Canister Bomb as it is, or do some lightning damage here. Or not at all. You've got a ton of different ways you can make this really work, and out of all of the builds that we've talked about so far, this one probably is the second most versatile while remaining pretty coordinated. The only one that beats it out really in terms of that would be, I think, the Warlord, which is the Soldier Oathkeeper combination, where you can do whatever you want with that combination and it works. This isn't quite the same. It's almost the same, but not quite. You're basically picking some ability or some skill that you've got, and then kind of picking the rest of your skills according to what your favorite skill is, basically. This is a really good class, not necessarily to experiment with, but if you've played with both of these classes individually before in other combos, and you've found some skill that you just really love playing with, you can focus around that. For instance, I'm rather well renowned for my deep love of Blackwater Cocktail. You're probably intimately familiar with that idea by now. And I'm also very, actually a better example, what I'm way more known for, actually, would be the delicious Electra's Flash Freeze. I am very well known for my deep love of this ability. And I could very easily build around this. I can do all kinds of things around this, actually. I could go into Star Pact, I could grab Kalidor's Tempest, and then grab Flame Touched, as an example. And I could do a really sweet AoE type thing where I'm running full Kalidor's Tempest to Inferno, converting that Aether damage into cold damage, as evidenced here. Go into full Electra's Flash Freeze. Do I go with the Trozan Sky Shard? Nah, maybe not. I don't know. Feeling cute. I don't know. Might Trozan Sky Shard later. Who knows? Probably not, though. I'm not the biggest fan of Trozans, but what I might do instead would be Granado. Maybe with or without Skyfire, it doesn't make a difference to me. Or, since I'm not really doing a huge amount of retaliation damage with this combo, maybe I instead go into Canister Bomb for a good time. That's a fairly interesting idea. Not as much physical damage as maybe you would recommend. Maybe I do go into Granado just for the physical and the fire damage. Maybe I go into Skyfire just to convert that into lightning damage. Maybe I don't. It really depends on what items I have. Maybe I go into Mortar Trap at that point. I definitely don't want to be going into Thermite Mine because I'm not doing enough chaos damage there. But I could, if I really wanted to. But you can see where there's all kinds of things where you're basically picking your favorite skill and then just kind of focusing around that. Now, are there skills that you are going to universally always want to consider? Of course there are. Of course there are. And you already know one of the things that I'm going to say is Alextras. That's fairly obvious. I've already mentioned this. That goes without saying. Another one actually would be Flame Touched. This benefits most. Whether or not you bring this up to Temper, this will probably boost your build in some way, shape, or form. It's pretty interesting if you wanted to try a full-on physical build. You're still going to be using a certain amount of fire damage because Alexa's Flash Freeze is going to take advantage of that anyways, and a lot of your physical damage potential is going to be also tied to a certain amount of fire damage anyways. So, even if you're going with a full physical build, because you're feeling that spicy, you're still going to want Flame Touched, at least for some of it. I mean, obviously Temper in that particular case, but you absolutely are going to be looking at this, and you're probably going to be looking at this as well. Whether or not you build this is up to you. But that is, of course, worthy of consideration. And finally, Thermite Mine is worthy of consideration, because the only build that you can't really effectively use this is a pure physical build, or a very physical-centric. And even then, again, Flame Jet, elemental resistance down. Your physical damage is all tied into other damage types, so, I mean, primarily fire. But you can increase that fire damage through the use of Thermite Mine. So, there's no really wrong way to use any of these particular skills. If I had to recommend one more thing for the Demolitionist side of it, personally, I would say actually Mortar Trap. Again, this does enough of all the different damage types that you can pretty much make this work either way. You've got physical, fire, lightning, more physical. It's got everything you need. But these three skills would be the ones that I straight up will say, yeah, you should at least consider these almost all the time. These are all worth sitting down and considering very heavily. And the reason why I recommend, say, Mortar Trap over potentially Granado or Canister Bomb is because Canister Bomb, for one thing, doesn't do plain old regular physical damage, so that kind of removes it from the running of something you should always consider. It is a good skill to have, especially if you want to focus in that direction. Don't get me wrong. This can work really well in quite a number of different builds for this combination, but the lack of physical damage really pulls away its ability to just always be worthy of consideration. Same thing with this. I mean, there is some physical damage here, but you may not always be melee enough for this. You may not want to devote that many points to it. Granted, this is another great one, and do I want to? Yeah, you know what? We'll slap on a fourth one. Even if you're not melee, the increase in total speed, the health regeneration, especially if you go into Ulsman's Wrath, which is going to zap people regardless, it just doesn't care. It doesn't care. I would say Vindictive Flame. I'm going to go out in a rare moment and say there are actually 4 skills for this combination you really want to honestly, seriously think about using here. At least on the Demolitionist side. On the Arcanist side, obviously Electra's Flash Freeze. That goes without saying. Kalidor's Tempest works in a lot of what you potentially could do. A lot of it. There's actually very few builds with this combination that I don't incorporate Kalidor's Tempest into, because it's just that amazing in this combination. Another really nice ability here is, well, obviously Maven's Sphere of Protection. That goes without saying once again. But beyond that, I would say Albrecht's Aether Ray, because even if you're not going to use the fire and aether damage here, you've got the lightning that you can slap on at this point. And that critical damage increase hurts. So yes, it is energy intensive. I freely admit that. But it is very strong regardless of how you want to run this. So, again, unless you're going with that physical centric. But this combination is very potent. You can equip whatever you want here. If you want to use a two-handed weapon, you're just giving up on Albrecht's Aether Ray and Devastation, which, if you're not going with the Fire-Aether combination, isn't a huge loss. And even if you are, you can just replace those with other skills that work really well. You could go Hellfire Mine. You could go Kalidor's Tempest plus Alexa's Flash Freeze. Maybe you want to splash some cold in it, you go Trozans. Maybe you're feeling spicy like that. Maybe you want to dedicate yourself to the art of Olzuen's Chosen. You have options. Just even if you're using a two-handed weapon or you're using a shield, you're not using the offhand and you can't access Eighth Array or Devastation, don't worry about it. You've got tons of other options here. You can go into, for Pete's sakes, Panetti's Replicating Missile. You have options out the wazoo for this. So, my only real there's not really any kind of recommendation here. You can play around with this however you want. It's not even as glass cannon as a lot of people would believe, because you've got access to Maven's Sphere of Protection. You've got Vindictive Flame plus Olzuen's Wrath if you want to go into that, and that's increase in speed, that's increase in health regeneration, that's converting attack damage to health if you go that far. You've got Blast Shield. I mean, you have 12 different stuns. You've got the Stun Jacks, you have Concussive Bomb. I mean, you've got all kinds of nifty things. Of course, I'm pretty sure this can potentially stun too, can't it? Knockdown, pardon me. You've got so much going for you. You've got a knockdown over here too as well, if you go for that. You've got a ton of options. This is a really fun class to play. This is a really great class to do a focused build around, because as I've discussed before, focused build is taking an item, making sure you have the skills that that item enhances, and then basically building around that. This is this is actually what I would consider the perfect class to do a focused build on, because a lot of these skills work together in what I call clusters. There's skill clusters. They just work really well together. I've talked about some of these clusters, barring the universally useful skills. The rest of them cluster quite nicely. And that's what focused building is all about. Focused improv, excuse me, not focused building. Focused improv is all about. So, you can absolutely go to town on this with focused building. And if you want to, focused improv. If you want to practice your focused improv skills, this is the class combination to do it with. Be a sorcerer. This will teach you effective focused improv. Just pick an item, pick a legendary, level 90 plus, and build up to that. Build up to that item in the future. It's a great time. But with that being said, there's really no wrong way. We're going to pretend Flashbang doesn't exist because I hate it. But beyond that, there's really not a wrong way you can build this. Maybe some of your skills are a bit janky because you haven't coordinated them all into an effective cluster, or you're expecting to receive an item that will bring that skill into the cluster more effectively. It really depends on what items you have. But it's difficult to build this wrong, because you can usually recognize when a skill is out of cluster, as I'm going to call it, as I'm going to just invent this term, and just remove that skill and put it with something in cluster. So, with that being said, if you've got any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, what have you, please leave them down in the comments below. I do read them. Thank you very much for joining me, and if you like this, please like and subscribe. Have a great 24 hours.